Welcome to Rising from the Rubble, the podcast where we share real life stories of people who have faced life-changing events like burnout, redundancy, and depression, and found a way to rise stronger than before. I'm your host, Maria Newman, and as a coach, I help individuals navigate life's toughest transitions. Whilst listening to this podcast, you'll hear inspiring stories and coaching insights that will empower you to reclaim your confidence, redefine your future, and rise from your own rubble. It's now time to sit back, relax, and enjoy listening to our episode. Hello, Sally, and thank you for joining me today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. So, what makes your story meaningful to others?
So, my story highlights the importance of understanding, support, and openness around the difficult subject of self-harm.
Who will benefit the most from hearing about your journey?
So my story can affect anyone, but really I speak as a mum to other families trying to navigate their self-harm journey.
And what's the most important takeaway from your experience?
There's no shame in self-harm, there's no shame in struggling, and there is light at the end of the tunnel.
And on that note, Sally, who are you and what is your story?
I'm Sally Panks. I'm a mum of two girls. I live in Norfolk, and my journey started about 4.5 years ago when I received a phone call from my daughter's school. She was still in primary school, age 11, telling me that she had been self-harming in the changing rooms.
And how did that feel, getting a phone call with that news?
I was absolutely devastated. I didn't at that time know anything about self-harm. It was a complete shock. It was so traumatic. It was scary. I didn't know how to deal with the situation. And it just felt like a great big black hole had opened up, and I just did not know how to crawl my way out.
And I can hear people going, oh, but surely you would have noticed something. How was your situation at the time?
So my daughter has always struggled with school. She had quite a traumatic experience when she was quite young in her school journey, but she's also since been diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So she has lots of kind of emotional struggles anyway, but self-harmers are actually very, very good at hiding it, and that's where it is difficult to spot. I speak to lots of parents who feel like they're failures, the same as I did, because they didn't know, they had no idea. But it isn't that, the signs aren't always there. It's not easy to always be aware of.
I can't imagine how you felt that taking that phone call and hearing that your daughter was self-harming, because we're mothers and obviously our first instinct is to protect our children. So what was your first reaction to how am I going to help my daughter?
I mean, because obviously it happened at school, it was a safeguarding issue. So they had to obviously inform certain people. And we actually had family support come and work with us and social services. And I will say they were both fantastic. If you end up in a position where you have these professionals working with you as a family, don't be afraid. They're not there to judge you. They're not there to take away your child. They are there to support you. And a couple of things that they said really kind of hit home, but the support that you get from them is very short term. It's roughly about 12 weeks. So it's only really the very start of your journey, and obviously the healing and everything takes much, much longer than that. So a lot of the work that you do have to do by yourself.
So how did you know what to do? Because if that support is short term, how did you know what to do next?
I didn't know what to do. And if I'm perfectly honest, I didn't handle it very well at all. I can remember one day going into her bedroom and basically begging her to stop, to not do it. And I started to cry. And of course, she started to cry and she was like, I won't do it anymore, mummy. You know, she was just a tiny child. But what I know now, what I didn't know then, is obviously, you know, people that self harm generally carry a lot of guilt and self loathe. And when you add your emotion and guilt to them, it actually just makes the situation so much worse. It makes it harder for them.
So how did you navigate around that then? Because like you said, as parents, nobody gives you a book that says, oh, here you go, this is how to parent your child, because every child is different, every parent is different. And when you find yourself in these situations that you think you will never find yourself in, it can feel daunting and like you literally are alone and isolated. So
Yeah.
how did you manage?
I did feel very alone and I felt a lot of shame. Obviously, there's so much stigma around self harm, and you do feel like a bad parent. That's the first thing that you kind of, you know, you want to kind of cover it over and you don't want anybody to know because what are they going to think about you? But actually, it's not about that. It is about supporting your child or whoever it is, you know, that you're trying to support. It could be a niece, a nephew, it could be even somebody older. You know, there's lots of myths around self harm that it is just a young person's coping strategy. But actually, I talk to lots of people who are in their 40s, 50s that struggle with self harm. But really it's just it's openness. But at the time, obviously, I knew nothing. I went into a very dark place. I went through a stage where I was struggling to navigate life. I didn't really want to be here anymore. It was really hard. It took a toll on my marriage. It had a ripple effect across the whole family, and I didn't tell a lot of people just because I couldn't manage their emotion on top of mine. I was finding it so difficult to deal with the situation myself that I couldn't bear anybody saying, how are you today, Sally? Because it would have just, it wouldn't have helped at the time. I had to deal with it how I dealt with it. And I did spend a while not caring for myself, not moving out of the house, not leaving the sofa. And then one day a friend said to me, you know, look, Sally, you need to get help. You can't support your child when you're broken. So I did then go to the GP, who was fantastic. And I did actually take antidepressants for a while. I'm off them now. But, you know, antidepressants aren't everybody's thing, but they did really help me at that time. Again, it's personal preference and every situation is different. But again, I talk openly about my, you know, my mental health, how it dipped, how I needed that support to get me through, and it did. And the other thing that helped me get through was learning, educating myself about self-harm, you know, knowing or trying to learn how and why. As a non self harmer, I still find it really difficult to understand how hurting yourself helps. But now I know the science and you know, like the methods and things behind it and how self harm does help. I find it easier. But yeah, it's very difficult, and I think the only way to get through it is to educate yourself. And if I'd had somebody doing what I do, reaching out to these people to say, you know, this is, you know, how you feel is normal, it's understandable, try and deal with it this way rather than that way, I think that would have been really helpful. And that's kind of what I strive to do, is to be quite blunt, open and honest with families, because that's the only way that you can actually support somebody. You know, you can't kind of be fluffy and it's not rose tinted glasses. It's horrible. And, you know, but recovery is possible and there is light at the end of the tunnel, but it's not a quick fix. It takes time, it takes a lot of effort.
So if you could get in a time machine and go back to, say, when you felt at your lowest, what advice would you give to yourself? You've obviously said, it would have been nice to have someone like what you do now there. However, just for now, ignore that. And what advice would you have given yourself if you could get in a time machine and go back?
I think I would have reached out for support sooner. I think I wouldn't have allowed myself to get that dark. You know, it is self-care is really, really important. And a lot of people think it's selfish. It's not, it's a necessity. Anything, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, just to go and have that bubble bath, just to put some music on in the kitchen, have a dance, you know, do a bit of journaling, just read a book, 5 minutes. All those little things really help to just divert your mind away from all the horrible things that are going on, you know, for any mental illness, for anybody, you know, anybody that's even well and healthy. Self-care is just so, so important. And you do need to look after yourself to be able to look after others.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to like the very simple thing that they say to you when you're in the aeroplane and they're going through the safety briefing. You have to put your own oxygen mask on before you help someone else. Because if you cannot breathe, you cannot help anybody else. And so, you know, that just adds emphasis and weight to what you're saying, that self-care is important. You need to have energy to be able to support the people who you love.
Yeah. And as a parent, your natural instinct is to put your child first and your child's needs first. But it just doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you just have to put your own needs first to be able to support their needs. It's really important.
So important, so important. So you've alluded to it. So talk more about what you actually do, because obviously you have been in a really challenging and difficult place, and you've managed to turn that into something positive so that you can help others. So give us more detail. Tell us what you do now.
Yeah, so one morning, it was about October, November time of 2023. And I woke up one morning and I just had this idea in my head. And I said to my husband, I've got an idea in my head that I want to put kits together to support individuals that are struggling with self-harm. Because one of the things that social services said to me is you need to put a safety kit together. But at that time, when you're facing the trauma and the upset, you just don't know where to start. And it probably took me 2 years to get to the position where I could actually think rationally about what actually would need to be in that kit. And originally, I did a Google search, and it just came up with standard first aid kits or leaflets. That's not what my daughter needed. She needed a practical resource. So I came up with this idea of putting kits together to support other families that were in our position. So obviously I'd done lots of research, lots of training, and understood like the kind of the science and the chemicals in the brain and how the body works when people self-harm. And I said to my husband, I can't let this idea drop. It's either going to be a massive flop and a big fail, or it will be something. And actually, you know, we're kind of 18 months in and it is something, you know. Yeah. So the kits I produce go to all sorts of individuals. They go to children, young people, adults. They've been bought by homeless charities, anybody facing you know, sort of alcohol misuse, that type of thing. Obviously, counsellors, therapists support them for the people that they deal with. And they are just a very easy to use resource that distracts the brain from the need to self-harm.
So is that the purpose of the kit? Is there as a distraction from someone who is self-harming, whether it's like the physical cutting or drinking alcohol? It's a kit for distraction.
Yeah, so they focus on what's called the delay and replace strategy. So the science behind it is that if you can delay your mindset for between 30 and 45 seconds, you're less likely to carry on with that thought pattern, and you can then replace it with something else. So the kits contain a journal, and you know, so you can write down thoughts and feelings if stressful. But more importantly, they contain ice cube molds that you can put in the freezer, and also elastic bands that you can flick on your skin. So if you hold an ice cube mold in your hand, you get that cold ache, or if you flick an elastic band on your skin, it stings. And that action releases the same endorphins as what you get when you actually physically hurt yourself by self-harming. So those endorphins are the body's natural relaxant and painkiller. So that's why when you self-harm initially, you have between kind of 5 and 30 minutes of feeling quite calm and relaxed. But then, of course, when them endorphins start to leave the body, you then get that feeling of the guilt and the shame, and then kind of the cycle starts again. The underlying issues are kind of still there, and then you get all that pent up kind of emotion that needs to be released somehow, and then the self-harm begins again, and then you get the endorphin release, which then feels good, and it just, yeah, it is just that cycle of self-harm. So what we try and do is break that cycle.
I love that. I am so impressed that, because it makes complete sense that from what you're saying, it feels like the kits do two things. One replaces the feeling that self-harm gives you by, like you said, the rubber bands and the ice molds. And then on the other hand, it is that delay by using the journals to say, all right, then I'm having these thoughts, rather than reverting to the habit of the release. Let me just write it down and see it in black and white so that I can just try and be rational about my thoughts and get them out of my head and onto a piece of paper.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, another theory around self-harm as well is that some people like the nurturing and the self-care afterwards. So within the kits, again, we have like a red pen so that people can draw like a mock wound, and then they can dress them and nurture them as if it was a real cut. So again, that's, a science theory behind, one of the reasons of self-harm. So we try and kind of, cover all angles so that, because one thing, if I gave a red pen to somebody and said, use this to draw a mock wound, they'd say, well, that's rubbish, that wouldn't work. But it's just kind of like trying to put as many things in there to, and hoping that, it would help, something would help somebody.
Yeah.
But it would be really naive to think just because you produce a kit for somebody, they're going to stop self-harm. So the kits do also contain sterile first aid specific for cutting style wounds, because if you buy a standard first aid kit, they're full of lots of random bits and bobs. Let's face it, none of us ever use. So they are very kind of cut specific. And there's also a little leaflet in there with simple step-by-step illustrated guide on how to deal with first aid, because lots of young people don't even know how to deal with it. They'll cut and then not know how to manage it, and infection control is really, really important. So again, being able to manage your self-harm safely is part of what we do as well.
I think that's amazing. So, when you were first encouraged, before you went down this path of putting together the kits yourself, when you were encouraged to put a kit together, were you given advice on what needs to go in a kit at that point anyway?
No, I wasn't told anything, just that she needed a safety kit. So I just kind of assumed a few plasters and what have you, but and which is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Again, like I said before, being able to manage wounds safely is really, really important. We don't want infections, we don't want nasty scarring. But to have the other items in there to kind of delay that mindset is, I think, the most important thing. And also the kits are big enough for people to add their own personal items in. So what's really nice, if they have a nice photograph of like a family holiday, or a photo of their mum or their dad, so they open the kit and they see their mum in there, and they almost think, oh no, I can't do it because I don't want to let mum down. Or they look at the photo and think, oh, I remember that day, it was such a happy day, and already your mindset has changed.
Yeah. I think that's so, that I'm really impressed with that you've taken it to that next level and said, okay, then what is the reason for self-harming? What is the person getting from self-harming, and how can I combat that? What, when somebody hurts themselves, how can I make it so that it's safe? I know that sounds like a weird
Yeah,
thing to
no,
say,
and
but again, managing it.
that is exactly what it is. It is just
Yeah.
managing self-harm, offering alternatives to be able to, distract away from self-harm, and just being able to be safe. I mean, I've just developed a new kit that is more based on children around the age of 8. the youngest person that I've dealt with their self-harm is 5. So it's shocking, and a lot of children do start to kind of show the symptoms of self-harm at around the age of 8. It might be like nipping, biting, pulling hair, that type of thing. So the kits that I've developed for younger people don't actually contain any first aid, because we want to avoid going down that route, but they contain lots of fiddles and fidgets and motivational things that, again, just to try that relaxation, that regulation, to try and divert away from them hurting themselves. If we can nip it in the bud early, then it doesn't become their go-to coping strategy, because unfortunately self-harm does become an addiction, and like any addiction, it is very, very hard to get on top of. Of course it is possible. My daughter's been self-harm free now for 2 years, and it's taken a lot of work. So like I said before, there is light at the end of the tunnel, but it would be wrong for me to say it's an easy quick fix. Any recovery for any addiction, you always have ups and downs. It's never linear. There will be relapses, there'll be good days, there'll be bad days, but each step forward is a step forward.
It's amazing. And how are you continuing to look after yourself? Because, I'm a mum, and I know having 2 children is really challenging, and they're going through their own thing. And there is the guilt when you don't quite do something right, or they do something that hurts themselves. And then you look at yourself and think, well, what could I have done to prevent that? So how are you looking after yourself and making sure that you're okay?
Yeah, I mean, doesn't every parent do that? Doesn't every parent look back at every situation and go, oh, I'm such a bad parent. I should have done that differently. I should have said this. I should have done that. Even my mum in her, she's nearly 80, and she goes, oh, I should have done this when you were little. And, so yeah, but it is a case of just reaching out for support if you need to. It is so important. I'm really fortunate that I've got a really close friendship group that I know that I can call upon at 3 o'clock in the morning and say I need help, and I know they would be there for me. And I know I'm lucky to have that, because a lot of people don't. But if you do have your tribe around you, reach out to them, because they will 100% be there to support them. And obviously initially I was very secretive about what was going on, because I felt that shame and that stigma. But once I started opening up, and you'd be surprised that then how many people then say, well, actually I've experienced this, or my niece or my nephew or my next door neighbour's cousin. Most people that you talk to have experienced self-harm in some way or another. I think it's like 1 in 15 young people self-harm, and that's the ones that we know of, because obviously a lot of it is hidden, it goes unnoticed, it goes unrecorded. There was something like 600,000 hospital admissions last year due to self-harm. 50% of all suicides have a history of self-harm. So it is so common, and it's not just a young person's go-to. I read a report from Cambridge University saying that men in their mid-30s, the numbers are rising year on year. So yeah, keep an eye on your men. Suicide and mental health is really, really bad for men at the moment. And and again, we can all mask, we can all put a good smile on our face, and we never really know what's going on inside. So just checking in on people is really, really important.
So we are coming towards the end of our conversation together. However, I have a couple of questions for you before we go. The first one is, and I think this one's really important, what 3 things do you want the people listening to this to take away from our conversation?
So I would like people to reach out. I would like people to just talk openly about what they're going through, because it really does help. And self-care. Self-care is absolutely key. Please look after yourselves.
People will have been listening to this and thinking, Sally's amazing. And there are people that I know that will need your support. So make it easy for them. How can individuals connect with you to find out more?
So I have a website, I have Facebook, I have TikTok, I have Instagram, I have LinkedIn. If you look at S&L Safe Cut Kits, then just Google it. It's on Google. You can find me. But yeah, I'm there. If you just type in Google self-harm safety kits, you will find me. So yeah, I also have a Facebook page to support. It's a private group that anybody can join, and it does support anybody that's affected by self-harm. So again, that is there on offer if anybody needs it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sally. And we'll put in the description your link so that people can just find it easily anyway.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
You are most welcome. So this just leaves me to say thank you, Sally, for being open and honest, sharing your story and telling us how you help people. Thank
you for having me, Maria. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You are most welcome. And thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Thank you for listening to Rising from the Rubble. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Also, remember to download your free life assessment. Just click the link in the description to get started. Take care, and remember, every setback is an opportunity for growth. I'll see you next time.